Hi, Grace.
Hi, Abby.
We have some questions from the BookTube community to discuss.
Yes.
I think Cher has asked you one that we're going to handle at a later date, but Didi asked you about your thoughts on literary prizes.
That's right. Yes. So we will answer Cher's questions later. Um, so Didi asked me what I thought about literary prizes, and I think I have not a straightforward answer about them, so I thought we would talk about it for a little bit. I think mostly I recognize that I'm not indifferent to them, but I
Hmm.
don't care a lot about them. So somewhere in between complete indifference to obsession. And I think that I can admit that when I was younger, I definitely cared more. And I liken it to like you having your favorite sports team or something, like winning a big game or like a championship. But it's kind of validating, right? When
Hmm.
like the one that you like wins it all.
Oh, interesting.
But yeah, and I think when I was younger and I was like less exposed to books and like less developed in my own tastes, I sort of looked to prizes to kind of give me ideas about what I might read and like what was sort of legitimate or seen as worthy of my time.
Hmm.
But I think that has become less important to me now.
But there's also sort of a sense of like books that you had already read, you wanted them to win, or you were like hoping they'd get recognition.
Yes, and
Hmm.
actually, I think that's an interesting distinction because I think it's different when there's a book that you've read sort of pre-prize and you see it sort of like up for an honor versus discovering books because they've been nominated or because they've won that you're then like more inclined to read, which I think is also important, right? Like it's a big part of the marketing kind of landscape, and it can expose you to books that you haven't heard of before. But I definitely think it's more rewarding to me to have felt like I've read or discovered a book that was like interesting to me, regardless of it being up for a prize.
Hmm.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. I would say that actually, but based on the what I was saying earlier, the main value I get out of the prizes now is sort of sourcing a greater variety of books or writers that I
Hmm.
might not be exposed to, that I might be interested in, but I won't necessarily read a book just because it's won a prize.
Hmm.
If that, like it has
Yeah.
to like already be interesting to me for like other reasons, I guess.
Are there types of, do you look for certain types of prizes that maybe like recognize certain forms of literature or like lists in general, or
Yeah, I mean, I think that I am interested in like lists of recommendations generally that are like maybe broken down
Mhm.
by topic or type, but I don't like follow any one prize like
Mhm.
religiously. I think if I were interested, I am interested in is it I actually can't remember the name. I think it's the pen
Penn
like
Faulkner?
is
That one?
is the pen Faulkner the same as like the translation award?
I
Or
don't
they might
think
have
so.
more than one.
Maybe not.
Anyway, there's probably multiple awards for translations, but I think I am interested in translated fiction because I can only read in English. Yeah, but like I'm not as big into like there are those who like assiduously follow sort of
Hmm.
the long lists and short lists of like the Booker or whatever, and like I don't do that. So
Hmm.
um, let's see. Hmm. Oh, one thing I wanted to mention. I'm definitely gonna have to cut that out. But one thing I wanted to mention is that a problem I see with literary prizes generally, and I think it does sort of create this like echo chamber between critics and like the broader readership, where we get weirdly invested in either telling other people what to read or like wanting to be told what to read. And I think that that's like fairly limiting. And I think, like I mentioned about my younger self, I think we like sort of fall victim to it when we're not as like sure of our own reading interests and tastes. And I don't know, maybe one exception to this is that I am interested in what like writers I like what books that they are enjoying. And I know that that's sort of the power of the blurb or whatever. Like I don't really put stock in the blurb, but just like, you know, when they really do give like
blurbs are nonsense,
a thoughtful recommendation or something that they're like genuinely interested in, I am interested in that. But I think it's weird with something so personal that we're like looking for somebody else to like tell us that like this is what we should read, you know.
But you know, people also do, you know, it's hard to wade through the millions and millions of titles. There's perhaps, I can sympathize with like people wanting a little bit of gatekeeping in that sense, even if that's not how I approach reading.
Yeah, no, I thought about that, like, right, we all have limited time, limited money, and attention, so it is helpful, like, prizes and critics and reviewing, like, they do serve a purpose in that way. But I think, like, there can be this sort of, like, frenzy around, like, the newest thing, or, like, the hottest book that, you know, like, Michiko Kakutani loves, or whatever, and you know, like, if you're really concerned with, you know, only reading quality things, like, then I don't know that, like, you really want to be at the forefront of, like, publishing, you know? Like, you'd probably be better served, like, reading backlists, primarily. Like, things that have been vetted thoroughly. Not thoroughly, but...
Do you think that, like, the prize-winning status of a book can affect your expectations in a way that, I don't know, alters your reading experience?
Yeah, I'm sure. I think we despite like wanting to manage our expectations, like we always sort of have them when we decide to read a book, because like we're hoping that it'll be good, right? Or will, like, you know, live up to its description, or, you know, somebody's recommendation. I think like where this really comes into play is maybe with the Nobel, because the Nobel is not like for a single title, but it's like for an author's body of work. And that, I think, does confer a certain expectation. Like, I believe, you know, with individual prizes that are for individual titles, there's always this idea that, like, I may not get on with it because, you know, like, a single title can, you know, just like not be for you. But something about like an author's like overall literary contribution,
like there's
and,
probably
like,
one Bob Dylan song you like.
Yeah, I don't know. So anyway, I just think like maybe the Nobel's like in a different category. But
yeah, I mean, I think also it's possible that you could maybe lend more trust to a book if it has gained recognition that you might not otherwise. But, you know, you can also be set up to be disappointed. Yeah. It's also like, you know, a prize could be chosen by like a small group of people. Like it's very hard to...
Yeah. So that's kind of interesting. I think that there's like, then this is not unique to books, right? Like this is true in other mediums, like with, you know, fine art or film, where Night Moth gives it some realism. You know, where like it can be fun to see like if you align with like critics, right? Or if you like strongly disagree with them as well. So there's this element, I think, of like wanting to be part of the conversation, right? But I just, like, I don't think that, like, if I like something, it doesn't really matter to me, like, if, you know, like, a major outlet reviewer also likes it, you know? Like, I don't, like, I think just, like, ultimately it's just, like, too personal of a hobby. Like, you know, I don't feel like I'm personally gaining cultural cachet if I like something that was, like, well reviewed, you know?
But sometimes when you dislike something that's been widely lauded, that can be disconcerting or, like, puzzling.
Yeah, okay, so maybe in that instance, it's sort of like there's this case of, I think the ego is involved a little bit of, like, did I just not get it? You know?
I feel like I'm always just like, no, everyone else is wrong.
I'm
like, it's not my fault. It's their problem.
Yeah, okay, so I think, like, for me, ultimately, and again, like, I don't view myself as, like, a static sort of reader, right? Like, you know, tastes change, things evolve. But I think it can come down to sort of this distinction of, like, commercial versus literary, which can be a false binary. But,
Absolutely.
like, I think that maybe sometimes I just have this thought that books that are, like, insanely popular, I will either, like fine, or just, like, think they're okay, but, like, nothing special, because I think that as I'm, like, getting older in my reading, like, I am more interested in, like, authorial risk, or, like, experimentation, or, like, you know, disrupting like traditional storytelling in ways that, like, I will find new and interesting, and not just, like, a good story, you know. And so because of that, I don't necessarily expect that what I like, it would be great if, like, other people like what I like, but I don't necessarily expect to like what appeals to, like, most people.
If you had a literary prize, Grace, what would you call it?
I guess, like, the Grace Prize, right? And, like,
this is pretty good.
Yeah.
What literary prize would you give me if you're going to award me a literary prize?
Oh, like one that exists?
Yes.
Oh dear. Well, here's the thing. I'm going to expose my ignorance of prizes.
Wow.
I'm sure there are many prizes for plays, but the only one I can think of is, like, Pulitzer. So
yes.
I guess I would give you a Pulitzer.
The Pulitzer for drama?
Yeah.
That's the one I wanted.
Okay.
But I would have accepted a Tony also.
That's great. Oh, yeah.
Or an Oscar. All right.
Well, I guess it's like I don't associate with musicals, but, you know, that's my problem.
They have a Best Play.
Oh, I did not know that.
Wow. Okay. Well, it is at 13 minutes, so...
Jesus.
Do you want to continue?
There's something else I wanted to say.
Okay.
So, yeah, I guess we're just... Whatever. This is, you know...
There's no rules.
Who are we fooling? I'm not going to edit this. So... Okay, so the thing I wanted to say, like, where I think prizes actually do matter is in, like, the lives of the individual writers that win them, and for what gets read and studied down the line. And I think this is particularly important for, like, marginalized literary traditions, right? Like, to receive this sort of recognition, because I don't know if there's, like, I'm sure there's been studies about it, but, like, I think it's unlikely for, you know, a certain work to be read widely later if it hasn't won something, or, like, been given that, like, larger like, industry recognition. And so, like, I don't want to say, like, oh, prizes don't matter, because, like, they do, in that they give, like, money and networking and access to, like, the writers, and, like, really can, like, change the course of their career, and like, determining, like, what gets read in school or in, like, MFA programs, like, you know, like, that is actually fairly important. So I did want to mention that I don't think that they're, like, prizes are complete trash. But just that, like, for me as, like, an individual reader, and not, like, a writer or somebody that's, like, trying to promote, like, a particular aspect of books, like, it's just, like, subjectively less important to me.
Yeah. So. It's also possible that, like, focusing on certain prize winners can also take away from, like, a wider group of writers finding a footing versus
right, because then it's like, oh, we've already got one, and they like get to be like the representative.
You're this year's one.
yeah. So like that's a problem. Let me just see if I was gonna mention anything else. The only, like, the final thing I would mention is, like, maybe why I could start to care more about prizes, like, it's not, like, a static opinion, is because, it's, like, kind of a weird thing to talk about. Maybe we need to talk about it more later. But that in my own reading, right, so, I do think that in publishing generally, there's been a large conversation around diversifying, books, not only in terms of, like, characters and stories, but like who's telling them, right? And while I don't think that people should be telling people what to read, and that people should feel free to read what they want, for me personally, I know that I'm sort of like unofficially trying to like decolonize my own reading. And so I think that prizes are sort of a part of that, because they do sort of like grant entree to like different types of work and different writers from a variety of backgrounds that maybe haven't had the same access. So I think that I could see myself getting more invested in prizes at other times in my reading life. So yeah,
I think literary colonialism is a good topic for another day.
Yeah, I think we should talk about it more. But yes, that's potentially something to explore.
I would give your booktube a prize.
Oh wow. There actually is something called the booktube prize.
What?
I don't know if you know about it.
I did not.
Maybe we could talk about it in another video.
Amazing.
Yeah, great.
Okay. Anything else?
Well, I would just say that I think there's another siren, which we love. There's probably more to talk about. So, Didi, if I didn't quite answer it to your satisfaction, or if you want me to talk about specific prizes, you can let me know and we can talk about it again. But that's just what we have got for today.
In a later date, we'll explore how Grace has grown and changed as a person.
Great.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.